Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we will be reviewing the Rio Azul wash processed Guatemala from Father's Coffee Roastery. And there's the bag right there. And Father's, based out of Ostrava, Czech Republic. And this is the third time they've appeared on this channel, as we reviewed a couple of their coffees towards the end of last year. And since then, I've seen even more places start offering their coffee, including a couple of multi-roasters as well as a European subscription service. So I definitely wanted to go back and try another one of their coffees, given the positive experiences we've had with them up to this point. Looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 35. And recipe we went with for this coffee is our standard recipe, a 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this one has been in line with our previous Father's experiences, as I do tend to roast on the lighter side of the spectrum. It's not an overly light coffee, but it's definitely on the lighter side of things by most standards and metrics. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression, and the coffee immediately yielded a lot of Central American characteristics, as it did have so many of the nutty and honey aspects right at the forefront of the cup, while offering some great sweetness and clarity as well. Quite well structured too, so those three components really did seem to give this coffee a quite positive first impression, as I really enjoyed the first time around with this one. Day 17, ran it through the V60, and while the cup does remain clean and sweet, the nutty aspect really seemed to dominate the cup, especially on these earlier days, as there was much more of the brightness also present on the back end, very much akin to the listed stone fruit that they have on here. They have plums listed, makes a lot of sense. There's this kind of darker brightness that's present within the coffee. Slightly quick on the finish, but overall it was a pretty nice cup on this second day as well. Day 19, up to temperatures, back through the V60, and this really did seem to accentuate a lot of the nutty characteristics within the cup, as it did dial back on a lot of the sweeter honey that I'd experienced from the earlier days. Those were the two most defining factors on the first couple of impressions, was the honey as well as the nuttiness within the cup. And given that I was kind of trading off one for the other, and I was trying to get a little bit more of the honeyness as opposed to the nuttiness, wasn't necessarily a trade-off that I enjoyed. Slightly herbal with an almost Arnold Palmer-like texture to the cup as well. So a little bit more depth, even if it's not necessarily in the direction I enjoyed. Day 21, ran it through the April dripper, and there was a slight bit more brightness present within the coffee on this day, as it starts off pretty nutty forward, but then it gets a little bit more into this somewhat undefined bright aspect within the coffee. Leaves a little more of the nuttiness in the finish as well, and slightly less of the listed honey. So again, not necessarily in a direction I enjoy. Been really complimentary of the April brewer, but every so often you get a coffee that isn't quite as good through that brew method. Day 23, the cup is now trending in the right direction, as it's been the best day of the coffee to this point, as it comes out quite clean and structured at its best through the V60. Nuttiness and honey yet again at the forefront, with a little bit more of a subtle fruit brightness on the back end. Somewhat consistent in that sense. However, it's getting a little bit more clarity, structure, as well as sweetness the more it progresses. So that's what I'm really enjoying about this coffee. Day 27 continues to improve each day, as it remains really well structured, offering some sweetness and brightness to contrast each other. Plenty of the honey sweetness at the forefront. This is starting to become the most defined and abundant aspect within this coffee, and the slight nuttiness is becoming a little more secondary at this point, with plenty of the bright fruits throughout. Consistent cup in that sense, definitely skewing a lot more in the direction that I'm enjoying this coffee a lot more with each day. Day 29 continuing to improve, as at this point there's something I would identify as a maple syrup-like sweetness present within this cup. Given just how much dark sweetness there's present within it right from the onset, you can kind of see a little bit more depth and complexity in terms of that sweetness, and at this time I'm really liking the kind of molasses-like dark sweetness that's present within it. In addition to that, there's increased vibrancy with the brightness to provide some contrasting aspects to the cup. I'm really liking the way that they're playing against each other, so this has been another nice day, as the darkness is trying to increase in a very positive direction. Day 32, very similar results to the previous days, as the cup is at its best with a little bit of a cool down. That's one thing I definitely wanted to discuss, and is also true here on day 35, is that this coffee is at its best a little bit above room temperature. Hasn't been quite as nutty as the earlier days, and that's another thing I've really enjoyed about this coffee. Was on the early days, I could say it was a little bit more nutty than I typically prefer for my taste, but towards the end I'm getting a fair bit of this darker aspect, maple syrup, butterscotch, caramel, honey. Really enjoying the way that it's coming out in terms of the sweetness. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And 4 level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness, level 4. Yes, that's very much to be expected. We have a washed Central American coffee, and it definitely offers great clarity to it. It's very much in that level 4. I could maybe be a little generous and say higher side of the level 4, but it does offer wonderful clarity from start to finish. Finish, level 4. And that one right there, I said in one of the earlier days that it did have a little bit of a quick finish, and I could still see that. It might be on the lower side of the level 4 in that sense. It's a little bit more of that kind of honeyed sweet finish. Even then, towards the end, it has a little bit of a nutty finish to it as well. It's not necessarily the most long-lasting finish, but I feel like it still justifies that level 4 because it is quite well defined towards the end. Sweetness, level 4. Yes, one of my favorite parts of this coffee is definitely the sweetness present within it. Maybe on the slightly medium to higher side of that level 4 in terms of that sweetness, because you had an abundance of different sweet characteristics to this coffee, all of which in that darker sense, all of which I very much enjoyed. So that's one of the better aspects of this coffee. And that goes in line with the caramel that is also at that level 4. I think I mentioned 4 things. We had caramel, butterscotch, honey, as well as maple syrup. I could identify all 4 of those as kind of sweeter factors I experienced within this coffee, and I kind of lumped those all into that caramel component. So level 4 for it, definitely very much in line with my experience. Then we have a bunch of level 3s, and we will start with the acidity at level 3. For as much as I mentioned the contrasting brightness to this coffee, it's not an overly strong brightness that's within it. It's just very much felt within the cup. So in that sense, it does reach that level 3 mark, not necessarily overly strong. And I don't necessarily mind that. I don't necessarily need a whole lot of acidity in my coffee all the time. Florality, level 3, and that's in line with the honey, as it's a little bit more of that kind of honey floral component to it. There's a part of me that does remind me a little bit of some Panamanian coffees, and that one right here has that in a slightly floral sense to it. Saltiness, level 3, that's the nuttiness, slightly lower side of level 3, hasn't been as pronounced as the coffee has progressed. Stone fruit, level 3. Whatever the kind of bright fruit aspect that is present within this coffee, and by bright I mean acidic, but by bright I also mean that it's kind of a darker fruit aspect, it goes in line with that stone fruit, so I could definitely see it there at that level 3 mark. I probably expect a little bit more. When they do have a plum listed on here, I could possibly see that. And even on these later days, it kind of reminded me of a little bit more of a dark berry aspect, but it's present within this coffee. It's just a little bit more subtle and in the background as opposed to the more dominant, darker sweet components. Chocolate, level 3. Definitely more of a milk chocolate. I actually haven't even mentioned it throughout the time discussing this coffee because it's nowhere near as pronounced as a lot of the other characteristics in this coffee. And even then, it's probably on the lower side of level 3. Very much a Central American coffee. You can definitely expect a fair bit of chocolate within it. And then the last thing worth discussing is the body at a level 3. Yeah, it has nice texture to it. I mentioned through the Chemex it had a little bit less texture body to it than I probably would have been expecting, somewhat tea and lemonade-like in that Arnold Palmer sense. But even then, I feel like the body being at that level 3, it does kind of give credence to a lot of the other things that's present within this coffee, as this tasting wheel looks very much like a Central American coffee, so I guess at the end of the day, it all kind of fits with each other. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, it's actually quite positive. And this is now 3 for 3 with Fathers, as I've enjoyed all 3 of the coffees that I've had from them up to this point. And what I really wanted to say about this coffee is it kind of feels like a modern crowd pleaser coffee. It's light in one sense, as this coffee definitely skews on the lighter side of things in general, while at the same time offering so many of those traditional characteristics that you would expect from Central American coffees. And those have always been coffees I really enjoyed. Typically when I get something like this from, say, Coffee Collective that has a Central American or a South American coffee that has a lot of these sweeter aspects to it in a lighter profile, I very much enjoy them. So this one's no exception, as this is one of the more enjoyable Guatemalans I've had in quite a while. This one was definitely an enjoyable experience for me. type of person I would suggest this coffee to, and that's exactly where I was going with this coffee. Very much a modern crowd pleaser. So if you do like a lot of the Central American characteristics within coffees and the slightly more sweet side, but also do enjoy lighter profiled coffees in general, this one kind of marries those two together in a very nice way and makes for a very sweet while at the same time complex coffee in certain aspects, while at the same time maintaining some great consistency and clarity throughout. So there are a lot of positives to take away from this one, especially in terms of Central American coffees. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Rio Azul wash process Guatemala from Father's Coffee Roastery. Thank you for watching.